The first knock shredded the quiet like a gunshot against glass, so loud it rattled the hallway picture frames, and when I opened the door I found two men in mismatched navy uniforms standing stiff as mannequins on my porch, one clutching a clipboard, the other fake adjusting a plastic-looking badge pinned crooked to his chest, both staring at me like I was already guilty of something I didn't understand, and right behind them I spotted her, Karen, arms folded, lips tight with satisfaction. Eyes burning holes straight through me, while my heart picked up a tempo that reminded me of approaching sirens, even though I hadn't done anything wrong at all. And before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from, because what happened next still feels unreal every time I replay it in my head. Standing there barefoot in my kitchen doorway with the smell of fresh coffee still curling behind me and a soft jazz radio station playing that contrasted violently with the tension balancing on the porch like a bomb waiting for a spark, as the taller uniformed man cleared his throat and barked out, "Sir, we're here to place you under arrest on behalf of the HOA Enforcement Division." A phrase so absurd it scraped the inside of my brain, while Karen leaned forward just enough for me to hear her hiss. "Told you I'd handle you," and I felt that familiar cold steadiness settle into my chest, the kind trained into you by years of work where panic never gets to drive first, because out here in this peaceful cul-de-sac full of trimmed hedges and waving flags, something deeply off was unfolding right in front of my front door. That morning had started ordinary, the kind of regular that lulls you into believing trouble only exists on the news, with golden sunlight cutting across my kitchen counter, my boots sitting by the door where I'd left them the night before, my weathered jacket draped on the back of a chair like something waiting to be worn, and a mental to-do list spinning quietly as I prepared for a low-key day off from travel. When neighboring lawn sprinklers ticked in rhythm outside, and birds fussed over the HOA-approved feeder nailed to the maple tree down the street. But even amid that suburban stillness, I noticed Karen packing near her mailbox earlier, phone plastered to her ear, shooting pointed looks toward my house like I was the subject of an investigation rather than just the guy who politely declined to move his truck for her planned afternoon driveway party, which had apparently spiraled into something big enough for her to build a full fantasy about law enforcement muscle being sent to handle me. So when the knock finally blasted through the calm an hour later, it felt less random and more like the final act of a petty plot that had been rehearsing since sunrise. And as I stood facing these strangers claiming authority they didn't quite command, the seams already showing in their uniforms, I couldn't help mentally cataloguing inconsistencies. The off-brand patches, the lack of radios, the eager theatrical tone, while Karen's smug presence behind them pulsed like the engine of this nonsense, convincing her audience that she'd just summoned the long arm of justice over a municipal disagreement. The shorter one shuffled forward, a nervous twitch jerking through his jaw as he recited something that sounded memorized the night before. "You are detained pending investigation for repeated violations, resistance to community compliance, and harassment of a board member." Meaning Karen, obviously, because she let out a dramatic sigh loud enough to attract the attention of Mrs. Thompson next door, who peeked from behind her living room curtains. While Mr. Delgado across the street paused mid-lawn trim, the whine of his mower sputtering down as curiosity tugged him closer, and I caught myself wondering how fast gossip travels versus the truth, because scenes like this grow legs in neighborhoods and run faster than facts ever manage. So calmly I asked, "Can I see your credentials?" And the taller guy shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting sideways to Karen before offering up that laminated card from 3 feet away, refusing to let me actually touch it. And the closer I leaned, the more wrong it looked. Generic seal, no issuing authority, smudged photo, while Karen cut in sharply, "You don't get to question them, you're already in enough trouble," as if shouting could cover the emptiness of her plan. And I felt the internal gear shift, slide smoothly from confused homeowner to something else entirely, because this wasn't just harassment anymore, impersonating officers crosses into federal territory. And for just a moment I considered how surreal it was to be on my own porch watching a crime unfold in front of half the block, all set in motion by a woman furious that I wouldn't bow to her demands or play neighborly puppet in her HOA theater. While the fake officers looked increasingly unsure whether they were arresting me or regretting agreeing to show up in the first place. The tension thickened like humidity before a summer storm, pressing on my skin as the shorter uniform nervously reached toward his belt, not for cuffs but for empty bravado, and demanded I step outside immediately, while I glanced past him to see a few more neighbors gathering, phones out now, whispering, capturing every angle, the social court forming faster than any real legal one ever could, Karen puffing up under the attention like a rooster on borrowed confidence, declaring loudly that she warned everyone I was a troublemaker, while I kept my hands visible and my voice calm, asking again for proper identification and a supervising agency number, questions that unravel imposters faster than shouting ever will, prompting the taller man to stumble through a vague response about special HOA enforcement that drew a couple confused murmurs from the crowd. Because even people who know nothing about law enforcement know something about when authority doesn't quite smell right, like a plastic toy mistaken for steel. And as I leaned slightly forward, the shorter man snapped, "Back up, sir." Too late, because I already held the edge of his badge between two fingers, verifying my suspicion as easily as checking the weight of a lie, and the cheap pin bent instantly, exposing nothing behind it but thin metal and tape. Karen lunged forward with a shrill gasp like I'd stabbed someone, screaming that I was resisting arrest, ordering the officers to take me down, while Mrs. Thompson audibly whispered, "Are these real cops?" And Mr. Delgado openly shut off his mower, stepping closer for a better look, and suddenly the two men realized they weren't playing to a single frightened homeowner anymore. They were performing on a public stage, all eyes weighing them instead of automatically surrendering to the costume, which is exactly the moment confidence starts to hemorrhage. The shorter one stammering I needed to keep my hands to myself, the taller one mumbling about protocol, while Karen circled behind them repeating phrases she'd clearly read on some neighborhood blog about citizen enforcement powers, her voice cracking between fury and excitement like someone watching reality finally feel like the drama they always imagined, and I could almost map out the incoming collapse of their charade, except the crowd shifting closer added unpredictability. Witnesses heighten exposure, and exposure motivates desperate stupidity, so I grounded my stance, boots now on since I'd quietly slipped into them while the confrontation escalated, giving my feet that solid familiar weight that steadies the rest of the body. I informed them all calmly that impersonating law enforcement is a felony offense, speaking clearly so the phones could record every syllable, which made the shorter impersonator go pale while Karen barked a laugh of dismissal, clapping sarcastically and saying criminals always threaten lawsuits, her projection louder than logic, but the word felony rippled across the gathering quietly, replacing gossip with uncertainty, and I caught the moment when one of the men weighed bolting, shoulders tensing. Weight shifting until his partner whispered urgently that Karen hadn't mentioned anything about cameras or neighbors. A hissed panic the closest folks overheard easily, fueling more murmurs as Karen spun on him, furious that he dared acknowledge reality mid-scene, demanding they proceed as planned because she paid good money for them to handle it, which hit the crowd like a verbal flashbang, drawing gasps and one loud, "She paid them." From someone behind me, detonating the illusion of legality into a spectacle of exposed fraud, and instantly Karen realized what she'd said, slapping her mouth with manic hands while trying to laugh it off as a joke. But jokes don't unravel authority costumes, truth does, and the fake officers visibly wilted under the weight of collective scrutiny, now rising from every angle. I stepped back into the doorway, retrieving my phone at last, dialing without breaking eye contact with the men, who now openly retreated a half step, their shoulders curling inward like boys caught in mischief instead of enforcers of imagined law, and the crowd buzzed louder as Karen began shouting over everyone that I was staging the situation, that I had hired actors to frame her, the irony so thick it nearly choked me, as I calmly spoke into the line with dispatch. Switching into the professional tone I normally reserve for field coordination, providing my address, describing active impersonation of officers unfolding in real time, requesting immediate response, and the way dispatch acknowledged me, crisp, unquestioning, drew immediate attention from anyone familiar with emergency calls, which only deepened Karen's spiral as she shouted that she would contact the HOA president and have me blacklisted from the entire community. Still clinging to the power she thought rules entitled her to wield over people's lives, while the impersonators now looked less like accomplices and more like trapped animals, eyes scanning exits that didn't exist, and I knew the next few minutes would determine how deeply this chaos cut into everyone involved. As the distant sirens stitched into the growing murmur of the crowd, the realization finally collapsed into the two men's faces like a dropped weight. They'd crossed more than a petty boundary dispute, and the shorter one raised his hands in surrender before anyone even asked, turning on Karen in a strained voice, confessing that she had hired them through a private security ad promising quick cash for scare work, not arrests, while Karen recoiled like the ground had turned traitor beneath her feet. Sputtering denials that rang hollow under rolling cameras and anxious neighbors, and I felt that quiet internal switch flip as I reached into my jacket pocket for the flat leather credentials I rarely need at home. Stepping forward just as the first patrol unit skidded to a stop at the curb, uniformed officers pouring out with proper badges that glinted like real authority against the fading morning sun, their eyes flicking across the scene with practiced assessment. And when one asked who'd called it in, I met him halfway and presented my ID, watching the subtle flicker of recognition cross his face when he read the seal and designation embedded there, instantly snapping to a level of professional clarity that silenced the surrounding chaos, his voice sharp as he announced my title aloud, U.S. Marshal, which sucked the collective breath out of every throat present like the neighborhood itself had been vacuum-sealed in shock. Karen's composure evaporated so completely it looked physical, her knees buckling as she stumbled backward into Mrs. Thompson's hedge, muttering, "No, no. That's not real," while the impersonators dropped fully to the pavement with hands on their heads under shouted commands they finally couldn't ignore, the crowd erupting into overlapping exclamations, phones shaking as people tried to capture the twist that none of them would have guessed when they woke up that morning. And I stepped aside so the uniformed officers could cuff the men, the metallic click sounding clean and final against the dramatic hum of onlookers. While I calmly explained the sequence to the lead officer, the confrontation, the attempted arrest, Karen's admission, and he nodded grimly, already radioing for a separate unit to detain Karen as the orchestrator of the scheme, her wails rising shrill as she protested that it was just a prank that went too far, that she only meant to teach me a lesson. Collapsing into incoherent rationale, as the legal gravity of her actions descended mercilessly upon her pseudo-kingdom of HOA overreach. The officers escorted her forward next, her wrists shaking as cuffs clicked into place, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she caught my gaze not with vengeance now, but disbelief, unable to reconcile how her imagined script transformed into a nightmare indictment playing out in public, while neighbors murmured in uneasy awe, some approaching me with quiet apologies for assuming anything about me based on the spectacle rather than evidence. Others simply shaking heads at how quickly normal life can slip into chaos when entitlement gains access to acting costumes and delusions of authority. And as the patrol units finally pulled away carrying both the malcontents and their mastermind, the streets slowly exhaled, birds returning to their calls, sprinklers resuming their ticking dance, the morning itself attempting to reset after hosting a drama far heavier than most cul-de-sacs would ever witness. In the days that followed, charges stacked swiftly, felony impersonation for the fake officers, conspiracy and solicitation for Karen, the HOA issuing awkward communications distancing themselves from her actions, neighbors treating my porch like a debriefing station for stories and stunned conversations, while footage ricocheted through social media, transforming our quiet block into a viral cautionary tale about unchecked entitlement and the theatrical cosplay of power, all of which I observed with quiet reflection, because justice doesn't always roar through front doors wearing dramatic twists. Sometimes it stands patiently behind everyday identities, waiting for foolishness to summon it, and as calm finally reclaimed my home, I found myself returning to the simple rituals of that original quiet morning, coffee steam rising, jazz humming softly, reminders that peace usually returns not because drama resolves neatly, but because truth eventually collapses false performances all on its own, reclaiming the stillness entitlement tries so hard to steal. Authority isn't something you costume into existence, and trust isn't something you bully into submission. They are earned through truth and accountability. So if this story reminded you that fake power always breaks under real integrity, make sure you leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were standing on that porch when the knock came.